Thank you so much for joining us today on the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. I would love to have you join us at the Moms Who Know podcast page and the Moms Who Know podcast group, both on Facebook. So the Moms Who Know podcast page is really a great place to go to find out about latest episodes or upcoming episodes and to get all the information about the podcast. The Moms Who Know podcast group is really a place for discussion, and I would love to have you there posting your questions, just mom questions, self-care questions, life questions, whatever you want to post in there. And also to really post discussion. You know, sometimes podcast listening is a solitary activity, right? You're alone and you're listening to this podcast. But my hope is that these podcasts that you hear really make you think, and maybe sometimes you'll hear something that you don't agree with or that you question or that you'd like to go a little deeper with someone on. That is what the Moms Who Know podcast group is for. So join us there, post your questions, let me know what you're thinking. I love that interaction and I would love to hear from you. I will post links to both of those in the show notes, or you can just search it on Facebook. Moms Who Know podcast should bring up both the podcast group and the podcast page. Today's guest is Jori Reed, who I actually met on Facebook, and she has such an interesting story about her life as an adopted child, and then when she got older, about giving up a child for adoption. So her perspective on adoption is really unique, having it from both ends, and I think you'll really enjoy this one. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and my guest today is Jori Reed. Jori, thanks so much for being with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to learn a little bit more about your story. As I've learned a little about you and your life experiences, I feel like we're going to have such a great conversation today and just really getting into your story. And that can be just so fun to learn from other people and to hear their experiences. Now, I'm going to read Jori's bio here because she has a unique experience. She says this: Jori was adopted as an infant through the foster care system. She also chose adoption for her now 10-year-old daughter. She is a wife of 9 years and now has 4 children, and she believes that motherhood is the greatest calling on earth, which I agree. It definitely is. Now, to start off, we would love to know a little bit more about you growing up, kind of what you remember of your early years and growing up knowing you were adopted. So tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I always knew I was adopted. My parents always made sure that was a part of my story. I grew up the youngest of 3 older siblings, and it was just really easy, really natural. I look actually just like them. No one can really tell by looking at me that I'm adopted. So I never really had that experience of walking around and being with my family and people knowing right off the bat that I was adopted because I look so similar to the rest of my siblings and my family. But they always made it a point for me to know that part of my story, that yes, you know, I was always loved, I was always wanted, but I just came to them in a different way.
Okay, cool. So how old were you when you were adopted?
I was 6 months old. My birth mom had me in 1987, and I was actually born at 26 weeks. So I was very premature, and I stayed in foster care in a foster home for the first 6 months of my life, and then my family adopted me from foster care.
Wow. Okay. So 26 weeks, that is amazing. They can help babies to live at that age. That's just so crazy and amazing. Now, did your parents always know that they wanted to adopt?
So funny story. My parents, they actually had my siblings all within a year of each other. So they had 3 kids in 3 years. And then my mom decided, okay, they were done. And she got her tubes tied. And then 10 years later, they decided they wanted another baby. And so they were actually going to try to get her tubes untied, and realized how expensive it was. And they decided to go the adoption route.
Okay, so there is a gap then of 10 years between you and your next oldest. Okay, that's different then. Yeah. So even though you had these siblings, they were not growing up with you exactly.
Yes, correct. I was the youngest and by far the most spoiled baby of the family, and they would definitely attest to that.
Okay. So I'm just trying to hear everything in this story. So even though other people, couldn't tell right off the bat that you were adopted, you said your parents made it a point that you knew. Was it like, I've heard people who their parents tell their stories of their birth a lot. What did your parents do to kind of make that a part of your history?
Just like I said, they always told me that I was always loved. I was always wanted. I just happened to come to their family differently. Back in the 80s, there were no such thing as open adoptions. Nowadays, you can have a closed adoption where you don't know anything about your biological parents and your family history, to semi-open adoption where you kind of know a little bit. You might know names, you might get pictures, but that's all. Or you have completely open adoptions where there can be visitations, there can be letters, or even pictures. And back then, it was nothing but closed adoption. So my parents, made it a point to tell me about my story and me being adopted, but they also didn't have much to go on. When I had questions, they tried their best to answer them for me, but they only knew so much with it being a closed adoption.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, you said one of the things that your parents did was to help you feel like you were always wanted. Did you feel that?
I did. I never felt out of step or out of place with my family growing up. We have always been a very close-knit family. It wasn't until my teen years I kind of felt that a little bit, more of growing up and trying to figure out who I was. And as an adoptee, you have natural questions. You do. You wonder where you came from. You wonder about your biological family and what they look like, and if you looked like them at all. Even though you're loved and you have another family, it's just these natural questions that you have.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so how did you feel about your birth parents? When you said that your parents made you feel always wanted, I know that can be a real struggle of people who have been adopted, is that feeling of being unwanted by their birth parents. Was there any of that for you, or how did you feel about that relationship?
So yeah, I didn't feel that when I was younger, but as I grew up a little bit, I did. I kind of questioned, was there something wrong with me? What did I do something? Why didn't my birth mom want to raise me? And it's not until you get older and you realize that that's all wrong. That's all mistaken. Those are things you don't really, some people never have the answers to those questions. But as a birth mom now and going through what I've gone through, knowing those things aren't true just really solidified the love and gratitude I have towards my birth mom. So it was harder growing up, but going through placing my own daughter for adoption, I realized how wrong I was.
Let's talk about that a little bit then. Tell us a little bit about the experience of getting pregnant unexpectedly and what that was like giving up a baby for adoption.
So I played sports in high school, and I knew I wanted to always go to college and play soccer. That was my sport. And I decided to go to college close to home. And, I was just living the college life at 20 years old, and I was making some pretty reckless decisions. And my consequences finally caught up to me, and I got pregnant, and I was devastated. I grew up, in a Christian household, and I was just scared to death to tell my family, and I just really thought my life was over. And it's so funny looking back that that couldn't have been further from the truth.
So what was their reaction when your family found out?
Oh, gosh. I still remember it to this day. My mom cried and I cried, and it was nothing but love. I can't believe that I actually thought in my mind that it would be anything different. And she said, she was disappointed, but that my parents, they would do anything that I wanted. They would support whatever decision that I made, whether it was to be a single parent or to place my baby for adoption. And I was so taken back and just so full of more love for them, because I don't know why I thought I would get a different reaction. My dad was a little bit harder. He said adoption was out of the question in the very beginning. I think that was just his, knee-gut reaction to finding out that his youngest daughter was pregnant and in college. And so I think that was a little bit harder. And he was, the one I was the most nervous to tell.
So why did he say, what was his proposal? He didn't want you to give up the baby for adoption. What was his thought?
No, he didn't want me to place the baby for adoption at first. Just kind of, I think that was just, like I said, his first reaction. And then after some research and after some thought about it, he changed his mind. Where I live, Delaware is a really small state, and news travels fast, and around church. And so some family friends found out that I was pregnant and I was considering adoption, which I really wasn't yet. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just, told my family, and they actually live out west, and they were just praying about adding another baby to their family. And they decided to call me and ask if, they would, they said that they would be honored to raise my baby as their own. And that, it basically, because they were family friends, he changed my diaper as a baby, and our parents were really great friends. And I grew up with them. And so from then on, everything that I read, everything I saw, everything I did pointed towards adoption.
Wow. Okay. So as you considered this, so you went ahead, and this family that you knew is who adopted your baby. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So that is interesting that you went with someone that you knew. I see how that can change the dynamic a little bit. Now, I'm really interested in what we talked about. So as you went through, high school, and as you got older, and you said you started to question some of these things about the way your birth mother felt about you. Now, how did that influence your decision to place your baby for adoption?
Absolutely, Chanel. That was huge for me. I knew that the one thing I wanted for my baby was to have, if I was going to go through adoption, that I wanted to have an open adoption. I wanted her to have what I didn't, to be able to have a relationship with her, to be able to watch her grow up. And I knew that if I chose that family, that would be a reality for me. And it's something I never had and, never had to navigate through before. But that was really important to me. And because growing up, I had questions, and unfortunately, I didn't know my birth mom growing up, and I couldn't turn anywhere to get those questions answered. And now for my birth daughter, all she has to do is pick up the phone. And I think that's incredible.
It is incredible. So what has your relationship been like with her?
Oh, gosh. Just amazing from the beginning. Ever since, I found out that I was going to have a girl, I actually contemplated being a single mom. And instead, I just had this incredible, to this day, the most spiritual experience I've ever had while talking to her adoptive dad one day. And I just knew that that was the family that she belonged with. And I couldn't deny it. It was incredible. And watching her grow up and watching her become this young woman who's now 10, who's, so amazing and athletic and funny. It's just, and to be a part of that, to have visits and to get pictures and to Skype with her and to just be a part of her life is absolutely incredible. And I cherish every time I get to talk and every time I get to see her. It's really amazing.
That is amazing. Are your kids close with her, or do they know her? Have they met her?
So I got married. She was just about a year old, just a little over a year old when I got married. And then the following year, I had my own twin girls. And it was really interesting when they finally got to meet each other and how they interacted with each other. It was kind of overwhelming because I had all three of them there, and something again that I had to navigate and kind of guide through because I've never experienced that. And now that my girls are older and they have had more visits with her, and as I communicate with them about what adoption is and how I was adopted and why I placed Tally for adoption, we get to have this open dialogue, this healthy dialogue, and hoping that they understand, why I did what I felt was best for the both of us at that time, and yet to have this relationship with her. And it's fun to see all of them interact and to see Tally interact with them and with my side of the family. And it's really fun.
That is really neat. I'm so glad that they do have that relationship and that it's just, a different dynamic, but really part of the family. And I think that's amazing that you've been able to do that. Now, I want to talk about, now your present, kind of looking back, the things that you've learned through this experience and what you would tell others in, going through this situation, either that their child is unexpectedly pregnant or whatever the case may be, however adoption touches their lives. But what would you share with other people?
Actually, I believe the numbers are just about 1 out of every 10 people you meet are affected by adoption in some form or another. I mean, you have 3 sides to a triangle of adoption. And whether you're a birth mom or an adoptee or an adoptive parent, they're all around us. And I think if we can all even outside the triad, just try to remember that adoption should always be about love. It should always be about that baby, about that child. And if we remember that, then, and putting them first, that it should work out and that things can go so much smoother. And, whether if you have an unplanned pregnancy or going through the adoption process, that it's going to be okay, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's hard and it's heartbreaking. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but you can get through it. There's, so much more support out there than there was, 20, 30, 40 years ago, for all sides, and just reaching out and sharing your story and hopefully touching someone else's life. I feel like I look at motherhood a little bit differently as an adoptee and as a birth mom, because I feel like you don't have to have biological children to be a mom. And raising my children that I have now and having that relationship with Talia, I feel like a little bit, what's the right word? I kind of treasure it more. And I feel like I look at their everyday lives a little bit differently and really try to enjoy it a little bit more.
That is so awesome. I think that, it's just so precious to see how the things that we go through in life just really shape us and give us this perspective. And it's awesome to see what your experiences have done for you and how they've really opened your eyes and given you this glimpse of really what motherhood is. And that's amazing. And I agree. I just feel like adoption is sometimes it doesn't get all the credit it deserves. And what you said just really reminded me of that. And you said adoption should always be about love. And that's what it is. That's what's so powerful when someone does choose to place their baby for adoption. It's not because it's because of love. Like you said, it's not necessarily because it's the easiest thing for them. In some ways, that's the absolute hardest thing that they could do. It
totally is. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, because you love this baby so much, you're willing to give her a better life. And that's amazing. I applaud you for that. Tell people where they can find you and follow you on Instagram.
They can find me at From the Heart 5 on Instagram.
Okay. From the Heart, the number 5?
Yes. From the Heart, number 5. Yep.
Number 5. Awesome. Okay. And we will link to that. Any final thoughts that you would share with people about motherhood? I love what you said about motherhood. And any final thoughts for our mamas out there?
Just take it one day at a time. No kids. I have learned, just in the past 8 years that they don't come with a user manual. Each and every child is different, and it is just a learning process, and none of us are doing it right. There's no perfect mom out there, and I'm going to continue to fail every day. But I'm so, so thankful that I have another day to try and do better for my children, to do better for myself as a mom, as a woman, as a wife, as a sister, and as a friend. And that if we can just get out of our own ways and stop comparing to each other and do it together, that motherhood can be really beautiful, especially together.
Yes, I agree so much. And I think that we're all there with you. We'll all continue to fail and continue to see the beauty in the failures. And sometimes, some days, we might just get it right. So it's a great process of learning and growth. And I love it. So thank you so much for being with us and for all the things you've shared with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening to Moms Who Know.